Okay, so welcome back to Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation Anime Review episode number 13. This is the 18th episode of the series, which is called Separate Journeys. Yes. Now, the start of the episode, from what I can tell, is briefly from... Well, from what I can tell, I think this might be an original scene because this didn't happen to stuff I read. So, I should point out that this episode only adapts the second interlude. Now, from what I read online, apparently there's going to be OVA coming out in March. And that's going to adapt the Eris the Goblin Slayer in the first intermission, Eris the Goblin Slayer. That's going to be for that OVA. I'm like, that's cool. I love that. That's absolutely fantastic. The fact they're doing that it means they're actually going to finish Deathly Book 5. As of this episode, they're probably almost done with it per se. Though I would say the only thing left to go is just chapter 6. It's chapter 7 and the 2 extra chapters. And that's it. Because basically, briefly, Rudius, Eris, and Roger on a ship. Where they mentioned, they managed to get this pretty easily thanks to Paul and the money that they got. And of course, here's the thing: there's nothing they adapted from chapter 7. Nothing. There's a brief offhand mention of it. I'm really hoping that next week we actually have an adaptation of chapter 7, because I just reread chapter 7. This is a very important chapter because this is where Rudius meets his aunt for the first time. This should be in next week's episode, just so they can cap off this particular arc with episode 19 and have the last 4 episodes just cover book 6. Simple as that. So, we go briefly to that. We have Eris and Rudius just basically being seasick, vomiting, of course, on the way to the next continent, which I believe is the Central Continent. And that's it. Just this brief thing, and the whole rest of the episode is focused on Roxy. Now, they do adapt. From what I can tell, they do adapt the intermission pretty faithfully, except they adapt the sequences out of order. They adapt the sequences more of a chronological order than the actual presenting the actual thing. Because in the actual intermission, they start with Roxy with her arriving at a village. In the anime, we don't start there. We start with her reunited with an old friend of hers named Nadra, who mentions that she may have matured, they're drinking buddies. He's basically a horseman. He's got the head of a horse. Kind of like Beta Ray Bill from Marvel Comics. This guy has got gray skin compared to Beta Ray Bill, who's got brown skin. So they basically chat, reminisce, and he mentions about the Dead End party. Of course, she's scared of that, the name Dead End, because of the stew part. And then he's asked, why don't you go visit your home village? Why don't you be here? She's like, okay. Now, basically, partway into her visit in the actual village itself, that actually happened at the start of the chapter, start of the intermission. Here, they kind of rearranged it to make it more of a chronological spread. And definitely, from what I can tell, rereading this intermission and watching this episode, I don't think they cut anything out for this intermission. Not really, no. I think they added one thing to it. It's like Roxanne enters the village. We do see that apparently the reason why she left the village, because never give a specific reason why. So the reason is because she actually doesn't speak telepathically. That's mainly the reason why. And apparently the way to speak telepathically is like tick, 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 tick. It's like tapping rocks. I'm like, really? That's what it is? That's telepathy? Not really. Yeah, I thought that was kind of weird. So I was giving her strange looks, and of course, she cannot understand what the heck these people are saying because we telepathically because they're not speaking normally. So she just walks around the village, sees a carving she did when she was a child, which this is actually the made for the anime. This did not happen in the actual book, from what I can tell. So, and she sees one of the kids get scrapes his knee, and Roxy, being a very sensible person who actually knows healing magic, walks up to him and properly explains to him, even though she doesn't speak telepathically. From what I can tell, they can understand her perfectly fine, except that she's not speaking telepathically. So she basically, it's called healing, and she heals his knee. And from what I can tell, the kid's mom has no problem with this. She seems pretty accepting. But I'm sure she's probably thanking her in her own way, telepathically, but she can't understand a word she says. So she runs away, and just by sheer coincidence, she ends up at her parents' house. Yes. By the way, we did see the parents at, I believe it was in the second episode of the episodes adapted book 3. Yes, I think so. Mm-hmm. So, they pretty much she sees her parents first time in over 20 years, according to them. She has not seen them in a long time since she left the village. And she, of course, does say hi. And of course, she sees stuff from her childhood still in the house. And they speak to each other telepathically, but she can't understand what the heck they're saying. So she cries, and of course, her mother starts crying, then she starts crying. And of course, they kind of reconcile, and of course, she falls asleep, and she wakes the next day. Of course, they do explain to her, thanks to their breakfast they have, what looks like to be breakfast, looks like soup. You usually serve for lunch, but it's probably the way to do stuff in the show, so I'm not going to criticize it. So they do mention the fact that a boy who claimed to be, of course, she said she was looking for her apprentice, aka Rudius. And of course, and they mentioned, oh yeah, there was a boy here 2 years ago. Basically what happened just a couple books prior to this. In book 3, this is actually from book 5, mind you, where they mentioned, oh yeah, he was here a couple years ago with a girl named Eris and Roger a Stupard. And of course she faces that, and of course she realizes that she's perfectly fine. They do cut a little bit of Eloise and the dwarf, where they stay behind outside the village. They basically put that at the very end, where they cut the conversation. That was the only thing I think they actually cut here, was the conversation Eloise had. Well, they would have the reason why Eloise is not in the village per se, because she's actually off in the town. In the actual book itself, she and the dwarf were actually on the giant alligator outside the village, while in the anime they weren't there at all. So then, of course, they tell them basically what happened when they visit here. Not entirely per se. They mentioned they visit there, and of course they mention how awesome she is. Then she leaves, and then she reunites with Eloise, and she, of course, does the same thing she did back in episode 2, where she basically used her ice powers to kick out 5 guys out of Eloise's room. Yes, Eloise, doing it with 5 guys. Yeah, no wonder why. Now, the thing is, in the book, basically, it was some revelations about her in, I believe it was book 9 or 10, I think it was, where they revealed that she's actually Sophie's grandmother. I'm not kidding about that. This beautiful woman is Sophie's grandmother. Well, she's an elf. What do you expect? Yep. And the fact that she's also getting engaged to a character who's actually introduced in the short story that's going to be adapted from the OVA. Yes, she gets engaged to him. How do I know this? I read the books, so I can technically kind of spoil this. Now, I'm not going to say exactly what else happens in the later on books, per se. It's just that it's a lot of really good stuff happens in later on books. My guess is book 6 would probably... My guess is it probably will start next episode. They probably will... And this is my hope for next week's episode. That chapter 7 gets adapted, because they need to adapt that one chapter, because that's the only chapter from the book. I mean, do I expect the X chapter to be adapted? Not really, no. They could probably adapt them. There's nothing really hurts it at all. They could probably adapt it for the start of episode 20. They could go through this stuff and then start book 6. Which, I don't think the book itself is that long. No, book 6 is... I think it's a little bit shorter. Book 6 is... Well, they say here 320. I don't think it's that much longer. There's a lot of chapters in this book. So, of course, the first chapter for the book is called Route Selection, which actually is the actual start of the very next episode. Mm-hmm. Well, it's going to be the title of our next episode. But I really hope that Chapter 7 gets adapted. It needs to be. Because otherwise they watch it and they'll be like, wait, when the heck did they get this boat? Like, what happened prior to this? I'm hoping that it gets adapted for next week, because that's an important chapter. Because, like I said, this is where Rudius meets his aunt for the first time. Yes, his aunt, who happens to be his mother's sister. Yes, this might take up a small portion of next episode, but I really hope this gets adapted. I really hope it does. That's my personal hope, anyways. But who knows? It depends upon the studio who makes the show. Okay? Me. But, and of course, Rudius. Now, the ending of the actual intermission was adapted faithfully for the actual anime, where they mentioned they had to look for Zenith, Alicia, and Lilia. They had to look for her, and asked, what about your student? Oh, he's fine. Which I do appreciate them keeping that scene that happened at the end of the intermission adapted pretty faithfully. Yeah, it's something, though. This is probably the first episode in a little while where there's not many cuts. Not at all. Now, I know that 2 episodes back, I think it was just last episode, I think it was, which was Reunion. This one, they cut a lot out. Like, oh my gosh. Like, Chapter 6, which I didn't think was adapted, based on the fact it was nothing in the book that actually adapted for the actual episode itself. They pretty much cut almost the entire frickin' chapter. Mm-hmm. Yes. So, here's hoping that maybe they, when this car finishes up, they might actually, well, finish adapting this arc. Oh, well, this book per se, because a lot of that was cut from last week's episode. This week, not necessarily. No, I don't think so. Not that I can think of, no. But I am personally looking forward to the very next episode. Mm-hmm. Which is called Route Selection, which that should be interesting. But it all depends. And it looks like, though, we're still doing Book 5, so probably my guess is we're going to finish up Book 5 and start Book 6. Which, there was a tease, basically, for the new arc for the anime, so maybe we might get an extra episode out of this. It's possible. If I were the studio, I would give this particular cur one more episode, just so they can give a little more breathing room for Book 6, because Book 6 has got 13 chapters in it. Yes, seriously, it has 13 chapters. Here's hoping that they actually do a pretty good adaptation of that particular book. Because Book 4, I think they did a pretty decent job with that book. This one, they cut like a lot out for like no reason. They practically skipped over almost the entirety of Chapter 6. 7 wasn't even adapted at all. Because I read the whole thing. Nothing from this book was adapted for this episode. Nothing. It was all about Roxy. Yep. But I'm not going to say much else about it. It's a good episode. And I'm pretty happy with the fact that only like one thing was cut. Yep. So yeah, that's a particular review. Now, before I get to One Piece and Boruto, which obviously next to anime, I'm actually going to be reading the newest chapter release for Black Clover and My Hero Academia. I'm going to read those, put those views up, do my reviews for those two, and then I'll watch One Piece. Okay? Next video. Bye.